Part 2. An Unexpected Bloom. Chapter 6. The Hunt Begins. The happily ever after crept softly across the night. Heath watched the last gleam of twilight dancing on the leaves in the forest. The further along he passed, the less the dance had the shape of leaves, and the more it had the shape of spines and twists. The seep had been eating good in this part of the world, and what the seep ate, it swallowed. Heath's knuckles cracked as he clenched the deck railing, while at least one of its residents would be swallowing steel before the week was out. What James had described sounded like a selkie. Heath had only heard stories of those, and neither James nor Gregory had seen it well. One glimpse only, and one glimpse each. "I saw it crouched by the docks a month ago, in the shadow of an old warehouse, around twilight," James had testified to him. "Looked right at me, it did. A shrouded mass, but I could see the reflection of eyes looking at me. It even pointed at me with something. Then it dove into the water." Gregory's description had come from the side of a boat. "I was sailing east along Lake Giselle. Our course took us close by the nearby seep encroachment, and my pride took me even closer. It was pre-dawn, no time to be so near a place like that, but I had something to prove. There it was, behind a tree. I saw a bluish shadow with two large black eyes. Then my first mate attacked me with a marlinspike, and by the time we'd all pummeled the madness out of him, the shadow was gone." Selkies were, so the stories went, long, round, and extremely muscular. They were nimble in the water, with two legs that sort of stuck together to form a kind of fin. On land they were faster than they looked, and could clear low-lying brush with their sheer mass. Possibly they had a pair, or maybe two pairs of tentacles, and they definitely had a face. A vaguely human-like one, even. And somewhere behind that face, so the stories went, lay an organ capable of pressuring the minds of those around it. And of course, there were the teeth. Everything in the seep had teeth, either long piercing ones or flat razor-sharp ones. As for the rumors of its inhabitants occasionally having human-like molars, Heath had long ago dismissed those as the result of someone misinterpreting their findings after examining the contents of a dead fiend. Most of all, Selkies preferred close proximity to the water, and inclined toward aggression over hiding. Heath was expecting a brief, violent hunt. As the world settled down for the night, Heath pulled out his whetstone and calmly sharpened his sword. For the first time in a long time, Heath felt he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The princess wasn't an unwelcome distraction, strictly speaking, though she certainly could be distracting. Heath had started to feel a sort of heaviness in his chest sometimes when he saw her doing little things like humming to herself, or feeding bits of dried fruit to the platy. Heath turned his gaze to her bedroom, the door to which she'd left open. That wasn't exactly wise, given where they were going, but he was glad she felt safe. On the other hand, she'd also left her bedroom window open, probably to get a breeze going. That was less wise, a lot less. Flying seep fiends were uncommon, but they did exist, and they'd go for a window far more readily than they'd try landing on the deck and going for the door. With a feeling of trepidation he could not, with a knife to his throat, have put a name to, Heath tiptoed through her door. Leaning carefully over her, he eased the window shut. He didn't trust the metal clasp not to make a noise, so he tied the window shut with a bit of string in his pocket. Just as he was cinching it, Cordetta drew a deep breath and turned over beneath him. Heath froze, expecting at any moment for her eyes to fly open, and for her to kick him in the balls before he could explain himself. But she only laid there, as peaceful as before, auburn curls draped loosely over her pillow and her cheeks. Still, it was only when she let that breath out that he dared to move again, and departed her chambers, closing the door behind him. The night was only growing dimmer, and so there was little point staring further into the vegetation. Heath took the ship to several hundred feet up and set it to hold still, finding a landing site could wait until morning. On his way to his hammock, he saw the platy curling up on top of a barrel across from the pantry. Whether it was stalking mice or thinking of the food within, Heath couldn't say. "Hey you," he told the platy. "If you hear anything weird, just growl." The platy looked blankly at him with those wide eyes. "There'll be bones in it for you. You like bones, don't you? Bones. You know what? That's going to be your name." The platy cocked its head and chittered. Heath decided to take that for agreement. Sunrise over the seep had a deeply unsettling quality to it. There was just something wrong, in Heath's view, about the parasitic landscape having even a tiny share of nature's splendor. And yet, its sheer stillness always reminded Heath of paintings. A painting of a twisted, ruined parody of nature, maybe, but it certainly didn't lack for color. The seep, put basically, was an ever-spreading landscape in which the trees and shrubs and other normal things that covered Lorcia's wildlands were sickened, corrupted, and ultimately subsumed into a scraggly assortment of twisted, spine-encrusted, utterly leafless woods, alongside towering pillars of brambles. Of course, that was only on the ground. From above, the seep was forever mired in the thick purple fog, through which only the tops of the dying trees and the bramble stacks were visible. It shifted around like something was breathing in and out, too. The fog was always much too wet, and always just a little warmer or cooler than made any rightful sense. Heath had never heard of anything edible growing in the seep's leafless, squelchy soil. Unless, of course, that was what the fiends sprang from. Those were edible. Technically. If you knew which parts to avoid. There was a little spot by a bend in the river that looked like a good place to make their entrance. There was enough treeless space that he and Cordetta would be able to at least begin their expedition safely. Heath brought the ship in gently and dropped anchor. The happily ever after splashed into the blue water, scattering waves and fishes all around. One of those fishes wound up momentarily on the beach, whereupon Bones, who had been watching closely, leaped over the side of the boat. With a spread of its limbs, it extended the wide flaps of skin which stretched between them just before impact. The impact was soft enough not to break any of its bones, and more than enough to send the fish to the great pond in the sky. Then it raced up the side of the boat, and was soon nibbling away at its prize atop the figurehead. Cordetta walked over to it with hands outstretched, and scooped Bones up. To Heath's amazement, the creature tolerated it, probably because Cordetta had made no attempt to separate the creature from its fish. "All hail, Lady Goggles," Cordetta said, holding the platy up high and rotating it around. Its wide eyes blankly surveyed all in its domain. "Truly a peer of the realm." Heath shook his head and went below decks to carve a few fishhooks out of the bones from last night's pork chops. Cordetta had been struck by a desire to cook using the seep drinker engine. Heath had not asked why, any more than Cordetta had asked why he wanted to save the bones, but the answer was that useful things like fishhooks could be made from them, with a little patience. "Lady Goggles! Lady Goggles!" Cordetta chanted above him. "No, wait, come back!" Bones had given her the slip, and Heath soon found himself staring into two blank discs. But they weren't staring back at him, not quite. They were locked utterly on the fishhook he was carving. The platy made a number of chittering sounds, cocking its head this way and that. "That's really all you want?" Heath replied. "These bones?" The wide-set eyes switched their vacant intensity to him for a moment, but only for a moment. "Well, hell, I guess a man only needs so many fishhooks." He tossed a bone over toward Bones. It chittered gratefully at him and ran back up, probably to knot safely atop the mast. Heath went back up himself soon after, and put the gangplank over the side. Cordetta watched him carry it all the way, and when he was done she came over and frowned. Heath," she said, "I think we're forgetting something. Water for Lady Goggles." Heath waved at the serene vastness of Lake Giselle all around them. Cordetta shook her head. Her auburn locks tumbled in the breeze. "I'm talking about a bowl. She needs her own water bowl. What if she gets thirsty next time we're in the air?" "That isn't anything I recall discussing." They'd been over the plan late the previous evening. Today would just be a reconnaissance. Heath was looking to get the lay of the land and spot some selkie tracks. They'd be going nice and easy. Heath grabbed a bucket, walked down the gangplank, and filled it from the lake. He trudged it up, set it at her feet, and folded his arms. "No, I'm saying we need to get one in town later. A nice one, with her name painted on the outside and her face painted on the inside." "It's a platy." Also, Heath was not looking forward to the argument over its name, in which he planned to firmly stand his ground. "But she's our platy now." Heath turned around with a slight smile. "Okay," he said. "We'll buy one in Guildmere with the bounty we get from killing the selkie. Speaking of which, are you ready now?" "Yep, ready. But I had an idea," Cordetta said, as they approached the edge of the seep. "You said Moonjade draws seep creatures? What if we used some as bait?" "You mean like a mousetrap?" "Exactly." "I foresee two problems. 1, selkies aren't mice, and 2, Moonjade isn't cheese." Cordetta glared at him before smoothing her skirt. "Listen, Cordetta," Heath said. He walked down the gangplank and hunkered down to take a pinch of mushy seep dirt and squeeze it between his fingers. "Are you sure you want to do this? We're probably going to be here a couple days tracking this thing. You don't have to go the first day." "I'm sure." Cordetta was right behind him. "And what's more, I'm ready." "I mean you really don't," Heath said, brushing the dirt off on his pants. "I insist." Heath was somewhat impressed to hear her say that. "Well then," Heath said, slapping his knees and rising. "Let us be off," Cordetta finished. She had a notebook in one hand and a pencil in the other. The soil squelched thickly beneath their shoes, and Cordetta's mutterings of disgust soon drowned out even the loudest birds. Insects buzzed loudly in the branches up ahead. Some of them were normal, others were befouled. What looked like a flying coiled-up centipede with boomerang-shaped wings zipped past Cordetta's ear, making her scream. For once, Heath didn't judge her. It had, after all, been almost the size of a mouse. And what was more, As soon as she recovered from the shock, she got going again, only pausing to brush a few loose strands of hair away from her face and scribble a few notes in her book. "Welcome to the Seep," Heath told her. "Hope you like moose flies." He'd been trying to lighten the mood, but Cordetta rolled her eyes and marched ahead. Mindful of his responsibility to keep her safe, Heath quickly overtook her before pulling out his sword. The fog was so thick in places he could not always see the tip if he held it all the way out. It took him a while to realize that the smaller brambles weren't just blowing in the breeze. They were moving. Heath was sure they hadn't done that the last time he'd been in the Seep, and that had only been a year ago. "It's so eerie here," Cordetta commented. "Yeah," Heath agreed. Eerie was putting it mildly. The thing Heath really never got used to about the Seep was its sheer stillness. Not its emptiness. He had thought of it that way his first time inside, and never again. But its seemingly endless patience in waiting for intruders to let their guard down. How the Seep Saints did it was beyond him. An oak leaf fell gently down in front of Heath. He looked up to see a final 4 or 5 leaves clinging to the highest branch of an ancient oak that yet refused to cry uncle. A loyal soldier, valiant to the last. "Heath?" Cordetta tapped him on the shoulder and pointed to a black splotch on the side of a bramble tower, where a patch of gravelly black deposits clung stubbornly. "Is that seepstone?" "Looks like it." We can take it, right?" Heath nodded. "Be careful." Cordetta pulled on gloves and quickly scraped the seepstone off with the flat of a knife, coming away with about a thimbleful. She tipped her gains from her palm into a little bag with an admiration so genuine Heath couldn't even smirk at it. Then a series of low growls drifted along through the fog. Cordetta gasped. Though she clutched at his sleeve, Heath could feel no mirth at that either, which puzzled him in spite of himself. "That's just a boar, Cordetta," he reassured her. "He's probably lost. More afraid of us than we are of him." Cordetta hugged herself. "Speak for yourself. What are those?" She was pointing to a group of crab-like creatures with band-segmented exoskeletons. "Those? Just some sea roaches." "Those are sea roaches? They're the size of my foot!" Cordetta took notes anyway. Heath had seen them quite a bit bigger than that, but he decided that didn't need sharing. He beckoned her onward, and she followed. As Heath hacked through the silent bramble tangles, the cause for his sense of humor being absent gradually clarified itself. He was afraid, just like that boar. Though the shapes within the seep matched his experience, and their behavior mostly as well, the terrible sense of intent was new. Yesterday, Heath would not have ascribed an ounce of intent to every withered square inch of the seep put together, and yet the sense of it lay thicker than the fog today. The seep was doing something. "Cordetta, you said you could see magic, didn't you?" "Yeah. Wait, are you asking what I'm seeing?" Cordetta asked. Heath nodded. It's sort of, how do I describe it? It's not happy we're here, but it's not angry either. The fog is drifting on its own, and the magic is sort of jumping from one bramble to another. I think they must all have seepstone inside them, or something like it anyway." Heath had been hoping for something more actionable. "Wait, let me put on my goggles," Cordetta said. She opened one of her packs, pulled them out, and strapped them on. "Ooh." She looked around behind them. "Ooh." Heath tapped her on the shoulder, repeatedly. She shrugged his taps off impatiently, so he looked around while he waited for her to feel like sharing. "There's some kind of wave motion," Cordetta said. "That's intriguing." Motion, in the seep, was ominous even when you could see it. Heath forced himself not to dwell on it, focusing instead on the sight of Cordetta, her fine creamy skin, and her lush auburn hair. Those goggles protruded from her face like the cucumber slices Heath had heard rich women put over their eyes when they slept, and the transparent lenses magnified her eyes so that she appeared absolutely fascinated at all times. "Make sure you don't bump into the trees." "I can see," Cordetta assured him tartly. "Heath, how do these brambles grow so tall?" She dotted the question down in her notes. "I don't know." "Shouldn't they fall over?" "Maybe." Heath thought about it. "The brambles grow into the ground as well, which would reinforce the structure, and at the same time cut up any sea roaches that try to eat the roots. Plus, platies wouldn't dig them up for food either. Or wait, do platies dig? I think they might." The more he went on, the more Cordetta giggled. Thought experiments were not Heath's forte at the best of times. "Probably, I don't know," Heath said. A little voice told him she maybe wasn't laughing at him per se. A little late with that one voice, he thought. Cordetta was silent for a moment. Then, "And why brambles?" "I have literally never given it a moment's thought," Heath declared. He threw his hands up in the air. "Why are you upset?" Cordetta asked. "I'm not," Heath responded, though it probably had something to do with all her weird questions. He was trying to track a selkie here. "Look, let's just go, okay?" "Fine, how about this way?" Cordetta pointed to a gap between some towers on their right. "How about not?" Heath was trusting his instincts on this one, and his instincts said seep critters were more likely to be down the path on their left. "But the wave pattern leads that way." All the more reason to go any other way. To confront unknown danger head-on was the way of those without other choices available. "Don't you see you're obstructing the march of discovery?" Cordetta caterwauled. "We're going to march back to the ship if you keep shouting like that," Heath replied. "We're here to track a specific quarry." Heath's wisdom was soon rewarded with the sight of a track. Not a silky track, though. This one looked almost human, with distinct toes and a long triangular impression with the weight placed mostly on the ball. It didn't seem to him that something so humanoid ought to be of the seep. It was wrong somehow. But the evidence was here before him, wasn't it? "What is it?" Cordetta asked. Heath hissed at her to shush. "The Selkie is an ambush predator of the most brutal and devious kind." Read a folio on seep fiends he found in Gildmere's library last night before departing. "Take no unexpected sound lightly. Leave no potential cover unobserved. Approach on guard and with your undivided attention." Heath would have preferred to know such things as when and where they slept, but probably no mortal man had ever learned such a thing and lived to tell the tale. Thus, Heath was taking no chances. "Heath, are those seep saint prints?" "No, Cordetta," Heath said. "Seep saints wear boots, like everyone else." "But how do you know? Have you ever met one?" Heath had. He gave her a long, quiet look, and she changed the subject. "Are you done examining them?" Cordetta asked quietly. When Heath nodded, she pulled out her glowing umbrella and pointed it at the tracks. She flicked a mechanism on, and a harsh blue light flared out across the wet ground. "Oh!" The light hadn't just cut through the fog. It had burnt it away along its path. Cordetta began to jump around, waving her umbrella and laughing at all the sudden clearings. "Heath, look at the surface of the brambles, the growths on the trees. Look what my moon torch did." "Don't worry," she assured him. "It doesn't affect human tissue. Ask me how I know." Heath honestly wasn't sure whether that meant she tested it on herself or him, and he didn't want to know. Cordetta held the moon torch straight up in both hands until they could see the sky again, and giggled giddily to see blue and clouds once more. Then she stopped giggling, pointed the moon torch toward the ground, and switched it off. "Hey, Heath," she said, her hazel eyes widening slightly. "That humming noise the seep makes. Is it just me, or is it getting louder?" "Hum," Heath said. "What hum?" "Can't you hear it?" Cordetta said. "It's definitely getting louder. It's coming from that way. We should take a look." She was pointing the same way she'd pointed earlier while scratching out more notes. Heath smelled a feminine wile at work. "I think we'd better not." "Heath, I don't think it's fiends," Cordetta insisted. "I think the source is magic." That was even more reason to avoid it. Fiends died, as long as you had steel long and sharp enough to reach their hearts. Magic worked its will subtly. You never knew when it was coming, or when it was gone. And magic didn't die. A chill wind blew suddenly, and the fogless space Cordetta had cleared for them was once more hazed over. It carried a scent like iron, mixed with the rot of a carcass. A wet smell, and a deeply unpleasant one, though the brambles seemed to like it. The bramble towers inflated ever so slightly, and a few hissed out dusty gray particles. "Heath, we should go that way. It could be important. Let's go." "No. Stop being silly." "I said, let's go." Cordetta grabbed his arm and pulled hard, striding toward the source of whatever it was she was perceiving. Heath, caught off guard, fell off balance into the soil. He clutched at the nearest solid object to steady himself, but that was Cordetta. She landed softly, but solidly on top of him. The impact drove the breath out of him, and the sudden closeness of her breasts and thighs made it difficult for him to get it back. "What the hell, Cordetta?" he managed. "Some sense of balance you have," Cordetta retorted, as she pushed herself above his chest. Falling into muddy soil ought to have made him cold, but Heath's body had flared into tantalizing warmth. As obnoxious as Cordetta was, and she was, and getting more obnoxious in equal proportion to her familiarity, her face brought a bright, sunny serenity everywhere she went, and the swish of her skirts went nicely with the sway of her hips. And now, her body was settling deeper into his with every attempt she made to push herself off of him. Then again, she'd gotten him stuck in the mud, and was making that closed-mouthed smile again. "You look like a bug," Heath told her. It wasn't his greatest comeback, but it was what he had. Cordetta's mouth popped open. Heath realized he'd never noticed before how full her lips were. "A bug? Excuse me, I'm a princess. Princesses don't look like bugs." "Ah, to see the world through your innocent eyes." "Innocent? Oh yeah?" Cordetta sputtered. "Yeah? Here you go." She yanked the goggles off her head and slapped them over Heath's eyes. The world swam with ribbons of color. For a moment he feared he must be losing his vision, his mind, or both, until he understood this was just Cordetta's goggles having their effect. Cordetta looked normal enough, though her long, normally autumnal locks now had a flaming red tinge along the ends. But the world behind her was doing somersaults of strange colors, with the air and everything in it simultaneously interlinked and locked in bitter conflict. It was like being able to see smells. if smells could carry emotion. Speaking of smells, Cordetta was close enough for her perfume to overcome the seep. Heath could tell it wasn't her magic or anything because it differed from the aura of magic that clung loosely to her head and swam in her big, doe-like eyes. Instead, it was fresh and flowery, with just a tinge of the acerbic. It reminded him of orchards and lakes and all the other places he'd rather be than here. Unless it was Cordetta herself that did that to him. There was, now he thought of it, something about her. Heath realized with a start that he'd put his hands around her waist. His fingers were pressing into her. Cordetta was holding her breath. Heath wondered for a moment whether that meant she liked it, but it was probably safer to assume the opposite. Heath put his hands back at his sides and made to get up. Cordetta said nothing. Heath suddenly felt like a bug himself. And was it the magic or his imagination that made her seem somehow redder now? She snatched the goggles back and put them on. "How do you see?" he asked her weakly. "Is this what you deal with all the time?" "It's all perfectly intuitive if you're smart." Cordetta primly and carefully got back up off of Heath, mindful to get as little of the seep on her clothes as possible. Heath was not so fortunate. The dank soil sank under the pressure of his hands and clung to the back of his coat and his pants as he pushed himself up. Worst of all, he'd fallen some 30 paces and counting behind the person he was supposed to be protecting. Cordetta had set off in her preferred direction the moment she'd regained her feet. Swearing well and colorfully, Heath ran after her. "Cordetta, stop!" "Sorry, Heath, I've got to know." There was nothing to do but to chase after her. As he hurtled along the path, he began to feel a vague sense of unwellness. Heath wondered if this was what Cordetta had been talking about with the waves. He began to hear a hum, too, which increased his feeling of illness as it grew louder. Heath had never felt anything like it, but whatever its source was, it was drawing nearer. "Cordetta, wait! This is dangerous." "I'm not afraid," Cordetta called back over her shoulder. "Why, are you?" "Little snot." Heath was afraid just then, and that meant anyone who wasn't was an idiot. He steeled his nerves, picked up his pace. How did she run so fast in those skirts? And managed to enter a strange clearing, sword drawn, just footsteps ahead of her. He needn't have. The clearing was free of anything that might attack them, or anything that moved at all. Except that was, for one bizarre pod-like plant growing in the center and a few sea roaches. "Cordetta," Heath urged, "be careful." Cordetta nodded. Heath was relieved to see her face had lost a little of its color. She must be taking this seriously. She was certainly scribbling plenty of notes. The pod was a little smaller than Heath's head and a little bigger than Cordetta's. It grew on a stalk about the thickness and height of a broom handle. It had wrinkled purple grooves along its edges, which convulsed at odd intervals, sending ripples through the fog. And this close up, the hum was physically audible and physically repellent. Even Cordetta didn't want to get too close, and he thought that had little to do with the sea roaches skittering around at its base. "The waves, they all come from here," Cordetta surmised. "Cordetta," Heath cautioned, "whatever this thing is, I can tell you the sea didn't have anything like this a year ago." "Let me try the moon torch on it," Cordetta said. "Maybe don't." Why Heath bothered to say such things, he wasn't sure. Cordetta's light cut instantly through the fog and started sizzling away the surface of the pod. The pod, or perhaps something within it, thrashed wildly, before opening at the top and spitting a crimson spike high into the sky. The thorn emitted an aggravated squeal all the way up and burst into equally red dust at the apex of its climb. "So that was a distress call, or I'm a girl Platy's uncle," Heath said. "I see no reason to assume that," Cordetta said, as she brought her moon torch closer still. She pulled the notebook out and began scribbling furiously. "Subject responds to moon torch exposure by attempting a last-ditch dispersal of its spores by a fascinating mechanism which I will describe presently." The pod emitted a series of sharp whistles, whereupon a blur the size of a squirrel shot out of the fog at Cordetta from the surrounding brambles. Heath's reflexes turned his sword on it almost before he saw it. The creature plopped into the dirt in 2 pieces. Heath wasn't sure what it was, but examining the 2 scaly halves, he saw one had claws like rose thorns and the other had teeth like nails. He thought the 2 halves might have 6 legs between them, but it was hard to tell. Right about then, another noise began to overpower the hum. A wet rustling sound coming from multiple directions. Whatever that thing was, it had only been the first of many. "How about now?" Heath said. Cordetta nodded, wide-eyed. "Then point that thing into the sky real fast. Aim for the sun's warmth." Cordetta did so. As soon as she'd cut through enough of the fog for them to find the sun, Heath knew their bearings relative to the ship. He grabbed her wrist to get her on her way and ran in, finally, his preferred direction. Cordetta stayed close on his heels, but the sounds of pursuit followed, and he thought they were gaining. Their shoes hammered against the muck, flying past growing pillars and dead trees. Cordetta kept the moon torch pointed ahead, which made finding sure footing easier. He could hear the pursuing pack making squealing, sharp-toothed calls to each other. They were definitely gaining. "Faster, Cordetta!" "Heath!" Cordetta yelled. The light somersaulted and then collapsed to the ground as Cordetta's wrist slipped from his grip. Heath shot a look back over his shoulder to see Cordetta had stumbled. He dug his feet into the ground, spun and raced back to her. He pulled her to her feet and pushed her to give her a boost in the right direction, but she only stopped and turned, a mask of horror and loss frozen on her face. For an insane moment he thought that look was for him, and that something in the seep was about to cut him down. But no, she was directing it at the ground, at her moon torch and her notes. With the pack growing louder every moment, there was no time to argue practicality. There was time only to shove the notes into his pocket and take up the moon torch himself. "Do you remember the way from here?" Heath yelled. Cordetta nodded. "Then go!" Cordetta dithered only a second longer. Then she was gone. Sword in one hand, moon torch in the other, hunting calls ringing in both ears. Heath bellowed his own challenge back. They came, the scaly fiends, pelting out of the fog like arrows. They had 6 claw-tipped legs, long fangs, and no eyes. Heath slashed at them with his sword, and stunned them with the moon torch where he had to. The tight beam of light it emitted wasn't easy to wield up close, but Heath made it work. He cut, and rounded, and snarled until 6 scaly messes lay strewn around him, and what was left of the pack was in full retreat. Then he ran before bigger things could find him. He only just had time to notice a set of familiar humanoid prints heading in the same direction as him. There was no time to determine how old they were. He found Cordetta peering anxiously from behind the front door of her quarters, and she maintained that look until her moon torch and her notes were both back in their proper place. Then she turned to him with a more apologetic expression. "Heath," she said, "I want to, just thank you for rescuing my moon torch, I guess." Heath replied. "I mean, it was nothing." Cordetta nodded dubiously. Then she pecked him on the cheek and retired to her chambers. He felt his skin burning there for fully 15 minutes afterward, amid the glow of the setting sun.